Welcome, everyone, to this month's workshop. Well, not workshop, but seminar on spirituality and health. This month, we've got a terrific speaker, Dr. Glenn Schiraldi. He has served on the stress management faculties at the Pentagon, the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, and the University of Maryland School of Public Health, where he's received the Outstanding Teacher Award and other teaching and service awards. He has 14 books translated into 17 different languages. His Ph.D. is from the University of Maryland, and for 4 years, he and his wife have led a faith-based addiction recovery program. I'm not going to take any more of his time. Glenn, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Harold. I so appreciate what you do for good, and I am thankful to all the people who've joined in for all the good you're doing on the front lines and trenches. I now work primarily with high-risk groups like the military, firefighters, and cops, and those who support them, with the goal of helping people prevent and recover from these kind of challenges. The secondary goal is to help them optimize their mental health and performance. And today I'd like to share with you what I wish I knew when I was starting out, and I hope that this might benefit you as well. Specifically, I'd like to talk about the nature and treatment of trauma, especially childhood trauma, which drives addictions often, and then the role of faith in the healing journey, especially when faith is coupled with sound mental health principles and skills. So going back to that slide, in America, at least half of our people will experience a mental disorder, particularly the first four. And most people will not get the needed professional help. And so there's a real need for prepared paraprofessionals and lay professionals. I usually start with post-traumatic stress disorder, the most complex of those on the list, because I think if we understand its nature and treatment, we understand much about the rest of the things on this list, including addictions. So we understand that PTSD is four things. It's an arousal disorder where arousal is stuck on too high or too low, stress arousal. It's an identity disorder with self-esteem and the feeling that the soul is shattered and all that needs to be healed and restored. It's an unhappiness disorder where feelings, including spiritual feelings, get numbed. And it's a dissociative disorder. If we understand dissociation, we understand PTSD. And many will come to faith healers before they come to mental health professionals with these bewildering symptoms, and they think they're going crazy. So how do we help? So I spent a summer once camped out at the National Library of Medicine trying to get my arms around dissociation because it's used in so many ways. And I put together this little graphic that I find often helps people to understand what's going on. And here it is. If you just for a moment ignore everything to the left of this semi-permeable wall, normal memories, associated memories, are stored like files in a file cabinet. They are stored in chronological order. Each one has a beginning, middle, and an end. Each one can be taken out and looked at with appropriate emotion and put back away. There is context to the memory. So, for example, if dad treats me well at 10 and the teacher at 12 mistreats me, but at 14, grandpa treats me well, then I can, in context, conclude that not all men are evil. I am the same person, whether I look at one memory or another, and I can generally control awareness. So maybe my mind drifts away to Bermuda, but I can bring it back to paying the bills. I generally feel safe and whole. What happens with traumatic dissociated memories? Well, they're walled off from the other memories. So instead of being a file in a file cabinet like these, it is the memory, the file on the desktop. It is highly emotionally charged, which is what these little squiggly lines mean. It is relatively nonverbal. Thoughts are often embedded, but often unchallenged, often unspoken. And it's more of a sense that I'm not safe. I'm not even sure why. I feel damaged, in danger. The aspects of the memory are fragmented. So, for example, a soldier comes back from the Middle East wars on leave, is invited to a barbecue with friends, and the smelling meat triggers nausea. Maybe he's not even aware why, but when you look back, he was on patrol in a marketplace in Iraq, and the cooking meat was obvious right before a suicide bomber splattered blood all over. And so now the smelling meat is a trigger that pulls back some of the memories, a partial replay, which is called a flashback, into awareness. It's not just reminders that can trigger the memory or parts of the memory. It can be any similarly emotional feeling. It can happen when you're relaxing or trying to sleep. And so some possibilities now. Awareness can be sucked into the memory. That's what a flashback is. We can drift away from our body, from a memory, from present stress, because that's what I learned to do when I was traumatized. Identity, which used to be whole and integrated, is now often split. So one woman said, part of my husband never returned from the war and is still over there. We understand the mechanism for all of this, that the stress hormone cortisol excites the emotional center, the fear center, the amygdala, which we'll talk about later, while impairing the parts of the brain that coolly store memories and help us to perform calmly. So dissociation tends to keep the trauma memory stuck where it is, and it degrades performance. So it's really important to modify this memory. And that's what good trauma treatment does. It will fully process that memory, which means to neutralize these strong emotions and all the other aspects that are excessive thoughts and sensations and so on. We put the pieces together, we integrate the memory so that the memory can now be brought into the file cabinet, stored as just another memory, not the memory on the desktop. If you remember one thing from this diagram, it is the word reconsolidate. Reconsolidate essentially means that when we pull up the aspects of a memory, bring it to conscious awareness, then the brain can change that memory. And it doesn't happen with avoidance. So how do faith leaders help? Well, we can help people recognize and normalize the symptoms of trauma, of dissociation. If you look on your resource handout that Harold sent out on page 11 and 12, you can see the list of trauma and dissociative symptoms. We can reassure people that when they process and settle their disturbing memories, both the symptoms and the need for addictions to kill the pain largely subside. We can steer people to trauma specialists who can settle those disturbing memories. There are various treatments, but I want to just tell you about three that I'm most impressed with. Most people have heard about EMDR, and we now know that eye movements help to settle the emotional center of the brain and integrate the fragments. There are two that I'm even more impressed with. Accelerated resolution therapy originated by Leni Rosenzweig, very interesting, creative woman. She started adding these wonderful innovations to deepen the effects of eye movements to the point where the EMDR folks said, you got to stop doing this extra stuff or else stop calling it EMDR. And so she called it accelerated resolution therapy. And in essence, what it does is it very, all of these are quick and well tolerated and effective, but in short order, it helps to, art helps to desensitize to the image, which is with its associated uh, physical sensations and emotions. Then it erases and replaces the trauma image, and ultimately then uh, develops a new memory of a happy, normal life. And it's amazing how quick this can work on soldiers and other traumatized people. The other one I'm really impressed with is the instinctual trauma response, which asks people who are traumatized to draw their trauma memory according to the 6 stages of the instinctual trauma response, because often the hand can express what the mouth can't because it's a right brain function. And so then the therapist posts the 6 pictures and in a very kind way recounts the story so that the survivor can see that the memory has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's over now, it's in the past. And the compassionate way that the therapist retells the story starts to weave in compassion to what was another otherwise disturbing memory. Faith leaders can do first aid. And so if somebody is dissociating, you can help them ground with simple techniques like kneading. I'll talk more about that shortly. And they can surround the pain with spiritual comfort, sometimes a touch. So we know that adult trauma can drive addictions, but I'd really like to talk about childhood treatment trauma. What's been called adverse childhood experiences, things that happened from birth or sometimes even before birth to the 18th birthday. This has been called the #1 unaddressed public health problem facing the nation because of the suffering and dysfunction, including addictions that occur in the adult years if not resolved. In a nutshell, ACEs imprint, they change the brain, the biology, and the sense of self. And I'd like to just do a quick dive into the bad news here. In 1998, the 2 medical doctors, Validi and Anda, had access to 17,000 medical records in San Diego, Kaiser Permanente, HMO. And this was basically a fairly well-off group, educated, middle-class, employed, health-insured. And they found that the 10 most common adverse childhood experiences predicted a wide range of health outcomes in a stepwise fashion. They found that 2/3 of even this well-off population had experienced at least one of 10 adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. As listed there, sexual, physical, emotional abuse, emotional or physical neglect, or being in a house where there's an absent parent from separation or divorce, witnessing domestic violence, somebody doing drugs, mentally ill, suicidal, or incarcerated. They concluded that ACEs tended not to happen in isolation. So if dad is an alcoholic, maybe he's also an abuser, and time alone did not heal. What was not healed? The original plus many subsequent studies found that all of these things increase in direct proportion to the number of ACEs. So basically all the physical, psychological complaints, a multitude of medical complaints, and a multitude of dysfunction. When people have an ACEs score of 4 or more, the risks for these kind of things typically increase 2 to 5 times, but the risk is much higher for addictions and suicide attempts. So, for example, when ACE score gets to be 6 or more, people lose on average almost 20 years of life, and the suicide attempts risk skyrockets to like 37 times higher. So obviously there are many more ACEs than the 10. There can be date rape, there can be perinatal or prenatal stress on the mother due to a cheating or abusive spouse, for example. But graphically depicted, it looks like this. ACEs, including attachment disruption, leads to harmful health outcomes And Felitti says that we do a disservice to treat the symptoms rather than the underlying trauma. Notice that dysregulated stress, which is stuck on too high or too low, is central to this ACEs health outcome relationship. And we know that the dysregulated stress is disruptive to all the body systems, the immune system, the endocrine system, including the stress hormones like cortisol, and the nervous system and the way the brain develops. So, for example, during the third trimester of pregnancy to age 3, the brain undergoes this tremendous growth spurt where 1 million neural connections are formed per second. It's kind of mind-blowing. Cortisol, a stress hormone, gets dysregulated, and when it does, it affects the epigenome, which is the structure that sits alongside the DNA strand and, like a dimmer switch, regulates gene expression. So the epigenome is influenced by our environment, and if that environment is exceedingly stressful, then the brain develops and continues to be on high alert, barring any kind of intervention later on. So a couple of brain basics here, just to inform our treatment offerings. The left brain, the left hemisphere, the outer shell, is overseeing verbal reasoning functions. It processes consciously recalled memories with words and logic. It turns out that the left brain is not fully online until year 3. What is online in the first 3 years of life is the right brain with its strong connections to emotional survival regions of the brain. Now, the right brain doesn't store memories and process them with words like the left brain does. And think about traumatic memories. It rather stores and processes memories as images, as senses, as visceral states like sick to my stomach, physical survival tendencies like I'm tense in my muscles and ready to fight or flee, or as a feeling tone, this wordless, nameless felt sense of, say, inadequacy or self-loathing, which we call shame. So all of this occurs non-verbally, largely beneath conscious awareness. So the right brain is dominant for the first 3 years for emotional processing and storage of trauma memories. Thereafter, the left brain comes online, becomes developed. However, a trauma at any stage in life throws the left brain offline. It's though the brain says, there's no time to think, no time to talk, emotion, move or fight or flight. And so the changes in the brain that happen in the first 3 years especially look like anxiety and PTSD, and it's likely to remain that way in the brain, barring any kind of intervention. ACEs shape psychology. If a child in the earliest years is fortunate to have a attentive, loving caregiver who enjoys the child, all of that imprints in the right hemisphere as a felt sense, a wordless feeling of worth. And so in adulthood, how does that play out? It plays out as self-esteem or internalizing of the mother's soothing calmness, and a trust that generalizes. One study found that kids who are securely attached are more likely to see God as loving. But what if the attachment is insecure? You and I have all known people, including people with addictions, that on the outside seemed likable and confident, perhaps accomplished, but inwardly a deep dislike of self-loathing, and words and logic don't persuade the person otherwise. Often this traces back to shame that gets imprinted in the earliest months of life. Maybe it's the caregiver's look of disgust or an angry tone of voice. Though the left brain doesn't take it in logically, it imprints and dysregulates the child's stress but in the right brain, it lodges as this wordless sense of shame or dread that tends to persist. So that's the bad news. The good news is there's lots of um, solutions that we've come to understand lately. We know that the insecure attachment, the maladaptive wiring in the brain is malleable. It can be changed through strategies that we're beginning to understand from neuroscience and attachment and trauma psychology. It turns out that traditional psychology, talk therapy, is not often the best starting point for trauma resolution. What do we train our young people in graduate school? Well, talk to me. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? But again, trauma memories lodge in the right brain, more like images and emotions, physical changes. So the effective strategies, at least initially, often start with bottom up or body centered strategies, which first calms the body, which then calms the lower survival emotional brain. Imagery is often used, and eventually the left brain comes back online and we can fully process and complete the processing of trauma memories. I'd like to share an 8-step comprehensive healing plan. Ideally, someone with trauma is best served by a trauma specialist, a competent mental health professional, but most people will never get that for various reasons. So the next best strategy is to equip that person with trauma management skills that they can use individually or even as an adjunct with treatments. Most, if not all, of everything I'm going to share with you can be taught by a prepared layperson, with the caveat that if somebody is destabilized or overwhelmed, know your limits, get that person to a professional. So there's a logical progression here. The first 4 steps basically prepare the brain to modify the trauma memory to forge new adaptive neural pathways. Steps 5 and 6 here actually rewire, change the trauma memory. And then step 7 is transitioning to a happier, normal life, because life's more than just overcoming suffering. And step 8 is the reminder at any point when indicated to get the help of a trauma specialist. So let's start with number 1. We start, and I'm going to explain the biology of trauma and stress in a way that will normalize people's suffering and help them realize they're not going crazy. This is just the way the brain is wired to respond to trauma. So if we first understand the biology of calm, when stress arousal is neither too high nor too low, the nervous system is in balance and everything kind of flows, ebbs and flows smoothly. All parts of the brain are online. The brain is hardwired to talk and think effectively. But what happens with trauma and emotional upheaval? Well, 70% of the time, we go into a hyperarousal state where the left brain shuts down, so we can no longer speak or think at our best. Heart rate, breathing rates are erratic and rapid, and strong emotions override our reasoning. That's 70% of the time. 30% of the time, people go into a hypo or under-aroused state, either because of chronic exhaustion from being hyper-aroused or excessive acute stress. Think of a rape victim who is pinned down and can't explicate, can't push away. Then the person tends to just numb and shut down and be collapsed. And you can see it in the posture, you can see it in the downward gaze. So the goal is to get people back into the resilient zone where we're hardwired to again think and speak logically and ultimately process the trauma memory to its completion. So the body-based skills, the bottom-up skills, are pioneered by people like Pat Ogden and Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine. Again, we're starting at the body level to calm it and then the lower brain regions. all the strategies involve tracking. Tracking is being fully aware of what's going on in the body. And when we track, people tend to get back into the resilience zone. All parts of the brain come back online, including the left brain. We feel connected to our body, ourself, our emotions. Just a flavor for these kind of strategies in the clinical setting, and these can be used in a non-clinical population as well. An astute clinician might say, as the victim is describing her rape, for example, I notice when you talk that your muscles are tensing, your face is turning white. How about we put the storytelling aside? That is the left brain function. And what happens when you just stand up and from the strength of your core, very slowly push against a resistance, a wall, an imagined resistance? You can think about pushing the perpetrator away, and then track how that feels in your body. What's different emotionally, physically? Or you can do if someone is dissociating or highly stressed over a memory, kneading is just a very simple, effective way to ground in the body. So you can try this right now by putting one hand over a wrist and squeeze in a way and release in a way that feels good. The squeeze might be soft, it can be firm, it can be deep, it can be shallow, it can be mechanical or soothing, it can be slow or fast. So squeeze, release, track. Move up an inch, squeeze, release, track. Move up an inch, squeeze, notice, track, notice. Work yourself up to the elbow and then work yourself back to the wrist. What you've done is grounded in the body. When you track what happens, all those nice things start to happen. We notice subtle changes and we start to get back in the resilience zone. Step 2 is to regulate the strong, distressing emotions that maintain arousal and disrupt proper memory processing. So the strategies, there are many. Mindfulness, for example, rather than getting into a thought battle, as we often do in some of the cognitive approaches initially, we just simply get under the thoughts, locate where in your body you feel a distress, breathe compassion into it, embrace it as you would a crying child who comes in with a skinned knees. You embrace, the crying stops, and then they go back out to play. A similar process with difficult emotions. We know that mindfulness is quite effective for reducing PTSD, anxiety, depression, shame, and guilt. If we add on top of mindfulness something called self-compassion, where you locate in your body, hold it with compassion, but then add statements like, this is a moment of suffering, moment, not permanent. Suffering is a part of life. We all suffer. You're not alone. May I bring compassion to this moment? May I give myself the kindness that I need? There are 9 keys to brain care, all of which work together to strengthen the brain and grow it in many ways, improve the mood. And here are the 9 keys. These are explained in some detail in your handout on page 9. But the ones that often get overlooked are the first 3, which are kind of foundational to the others. People often say, well, I kind of knew about that stuff, but when you had us make and commit to a written plan that we could keep for life, it was impressively effective. And so, for example, what I'll ask people to do often is make a written plan for exercise. Here's what I'll do on which days, which exercises. For sleep, and if getting the 7 to 9 hours that's recommended for adults is a stretch, can you maybe just add 20 or 30 minutes to your 6 hours or whatever you're presently getting now? Can you make a sample menu where you list what you're going to eat each day of the week and then compare that to the Mediterranean style principles, which are now pretty well incorporated into the federal government's food my plate rather, what research shows is that small efforts yield big benefits. So, for example, one well-designed study of sedentary adults with mild cognitive impairment, when they simply shifted to a Mediterranean style diet and started exercising a little bit 3 times a week, they found a reversal in brain aging of 9 years. Don't forget to hydrate. 9 to 13 cups of liquid, most experts are calling for, depending upon our size and activity. How do you know if you're getting enough liquid? If your urine is clear or pale. Just want to mention one thing about number 9 there. I love it when a picture says 1,000 words. These are nuclear scans of 16 to 24-year-old young people. Nuclear scans show functional problems years before there are structural problems in the brain. And so these two brains are firing on all cylinders. These people on the periphery have all used excesses of drugs. Pick a drug: caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, street drugs. And you see the Swiss cheese and scalloping effect. The Army was hopeful that energy drinks could extract a little bit more out of sleep-deprived soldiers. What they found is regular consumption does just the opposite: more fatigue, more sleep problems, more trauma symptoms, and symptoms of depression, anger, and anxiety. Step 4 is strengthening and stabilizing the nervous system with imagery that begins to offset the disturbing brain wiring and creates neural pathways that can be useful later on. So one example of how this is done is attachment imagery, which simulates the kindness that the brain needs developmentally. So, for example, if someone's open to imagery, you can just say, can you imagine yourself as a newborn being cradled by a very loving, kind caregiver who obviously enjoys you and responds to your needs, and there's a grace of movement and smooth melodic flow of speech. Eye contact and loving gazes and smiles are shared. And imagine just feeling safe and content and valued and enjoyed, and then track what that feels like. Okay, then we get to actual reworking of the trauma memory, having done first 4 steps. So Francine Shapiro, among others, describes the floatback strategies. And for example, a man comes to the door and says, "What's for dinner?" cheerfully. And the partner kind of loses it, exploding because it triggers her critical, abusive father. Shapiro says most of us have 10 or 20 of these core events that run our show in adulthood. So we use a principle of consolidation. With the recent event, we just bring up all the aspects of that memory without judging. The mindful attitude is whatever I feel is okay, let me feel it. Soothe those present reactions with softening the body and mindful compassion and self-compassion and lots of other skills we teach. Then when that's done, we trace back to the core memory, the earliest memory you have when you felt similar reactions. Bring all the aspects to awareness, soothe and settle them, reminding yourself this is just an old memory, it's in the past. Reworking shame. Because shame gets so deep-rooted so early, it's useful to have some skills to bring shame to light and change it so that we're no longer running and hiding from it. Self-nurturing imagery can be very useful here. So imagine that you as a child are being shamed by a caregiver. You, as the wiser adult, goes back in time to visit that child and knows exactly what that child needs, whether it's protection or embrace or encouraging look or a wink that says, "You're strong, you'll get through this, you're better than this." And then that wise adult that you are brings that child back to a safe place where you feel happy, the baby feels happy and whole. and then track. What does it feel like for that child in the child's body? Think of the facial expression, the posture, and what does it feel for you, the wiser self, to be looking out for that child, which is really representing who you are inside, and to know that you can be supportive at all times to that child. We then move to transitioning skills to a normal, happier life, and I'll just mention three for examples. Self-respect skills. Dutch research found that when people after a disaster felt satisfied with their character and the kind of person they were, that they experienced fewer post-traumatic symptoms. In Thailand, those who held themselves to the high ethical standards of Buddhism, meaning no killing, no stealing, lying, or gossiping, no intoxicants or sexual misconduct or abuse, had less emotional distress. So the ideal, we strive for integrity, but we also have skills to reconcile with our inevitable errors. So, for example, some strategies, a very simple integrity meditation where you get very calm and just reflect for a moment without judging. Is there anything that's ruining my reputation with myself? And just notice what bubbles up. We then, taking from AA's moral inventory, we do a fearless, searching, loving moral inventory where you take universally valued character strengths across time, across countries, and you rate each one to 10. How am I doing? Then we think, okay, when are times in the past when I actually demonstrated this trait to kind of build moral inertia? And then what could I do better to live each of these strengths more fully? The last step is to make a plan to grow character strengths. So you pick one, let's say honesty, and you write the positive consequences of my being more honest are, and write as many things come to mind. And then for the next little period of time, let's say 3 days, carry out actions to grow that skill, like no white lies. Forgiveness skills, we know from the research about its benefits. What I found over the years is those people who are good at forgiving, which is usually 5 or 10% of any group or less, have often felt forgiven and still loved after their missteps. If that is lacking in someone's experience, then imagery can be helpful when simple encouragement fails. So I was once training military veterans in Texas, and after the day was over, this salty, huge Navy vet comes up when he was sure that nobody was around. If I ever saw a guy like that in a hallway in a ship, I'd probably turn and run. But he said, I don't believe in a higher power, but I'm haunted by regrets. I said, well, I believe in a God who loves and eagerly forgives, but for those who don't have that perspective, VA counselors have come up with a kind moral authority strategy, in which you envision a being who is could be a spiritual guide, a loving friend, a relative, or just someone you imagine. But that being has your back, is kind, he loves you, she wants you to be happy and free of suffering. And imagine yourself feeling that being's full presence, who holds your pain and explains that you were younger, you were inexperienced, you were stressed, you didn't fully know better how to respond. I give you partial credit for the things you did well, and I'm confident that you'll grow from that experience and use it to benefit self and others. We have similar skills for forgiving self, for forgiving others, especially caregivers. What did they know when they were 30? We add happiness skills, imagery, where you simply take a few moments to recall in exquisite detail happy moments. People say, I didn't realize I could still feel pleasure in those memories, or that even I had those memories. Peter Lewinson gave depressed people an inventory of 300 events that people found pleasure in typically. You can give this to anybody and just say, put a check by it if you've ever done it and it was fun. Put another check if you think it might be fun if you did it again, and put a third check if it's something you'd like to try again. And then they make a plan to actually do those things. We can imagine a new future where you get relaxed and imagine crossing a bridge to a new, happier, more normal life where old memories are resolved, old baggage stays on this side of the bridge. And imagine yourself physically in the new future, relaxed and poised, a bounce in your step, a glow of inner worth. Track and then try it out. And then again, the reminder is whenever necessary to enlist professional help. So, how does nourishing the soul support the healing process? Mental health professionals are, on average, less likely to be believers. And so, people of faith can complement the healing journey in many significant ways that ought not to be minimized. Freud and Ellis, in my formative years, would say things like religion gives people guilt and sexual inhibition. That is not, however, what the data shows. This is a summary largely drawn from Harold's amazing work that shows that religiously involved people, immense amount of data shows they're happier as long as they don't have an image of God as being mean and punitive and controlling. Harold very wisely noted once that religion causes guilt, but it is also an answer to guilt. And so, on average, religiously involved people actually have less guilt. Faith promotes healing of trauma. A vet study, seriously traumatized veterans had their spirituality measured before the trauma treatment started, and they found that those with adaptive spirituality responded best to the trauma treatment. And that was defined as daily spiritual practices, daily spiritual experience, like feeling God's love and presence, positive religious coping, where I'm actually teaming with God, walking with God, not alone, being a member of a formal religious group, and a tendency to forgive and be forgiven. Harold and I, some months ago, had invitations to talk at a trauma, addiction, and faith conference, and he masterfully summarized the research in an hour and drew two conclusions. The first one had to do with depression often drives people to drugs as they seek happiness in the substances, which, of course, over the time is ineffective and self-destructive. Conversely, the research shows that religious involvement is related to less depression, greater happiness, less substance use and abuse, better recovery, and is usually protective against deaths of despair, like suicide, alcohol, and drugs. And then secondly, religiously integrated therapies and 12-step programs like AA have been shown to be remarkably effective in helping people recover from substance use disorders and addictive behaviors. How come? What does religion and spirituality bring to the healing journey? I'm going to speak basically from a Christian perspective, which is the one I'm most familiar with, hopefully honoring people of other persuasions and hoping that there might be some useful ideas irrespective of one's persuasion. People of faith understand that there is a loving creator who has a perfect, infinite love for each child and who bestows at birth infinite worth and potential. Therefore, individuals are not defined by their addictions, by their mistakes, their diagnosis, or how they were treated or mistreated. And I love to integrate and incorporate art whenever I can. I asked a youth group recently, what do you notice in this picture? And they said, well, God is pointing the way through the storm. I still have to steer. And notice the comforting, loving hand on that young man's shoulder. For deep-rooted shame, God is the ultimate attachment figure, the ultimate answer to shame. And here is where I think psychology and spirituality and religion so beautifully merge. Faith leaders can normalize and explain that shame is imprinted, often by ACEs. And so, step one is use all the healing strategies we've talked about for shame and trauma. Uh, Step two can be beautiful spiritual imagery. You can ask someone who holds a lot of shame, okay, let's just go under the thoughts and notice where in your body you feel it. Let's say in your stomach, give it a color, a boundary, a shape. Imagine pushing that shame away and forming a barrier in front of you, maybe a big boulder. And then imagine going around that barrier where you're greeted by a warm, loving hug by deity. Body gratitude imagery is another beautiful antidote for body shame. Russell M. Nelson is a pioneering heart surgeon, and he writes beautifully about the magnificent of the body. Magnificent means greatly made. And he says, just ponder, for example, in turn, different organs in the body, such as the heart, this amazing 11-ounce organ which pumps blood over 75,000 miles, and one chamber pumps it through the lungs so delicately that the air sacs are not damaged. And do that with all the organ systems of the body, the bones, and so on. And imagine just sending a warm white light of gratitude and appreciation, gratitude for the creator who built those magnificent jewels of the body. I find that with this one, the first one is often a little tricky to undo the deep-rooted shame, but after the second and third time, this becomes very, very powerful. Step 4 is be still and know that I am God. I don't think be still and know that I'm God means intellectually just know that I'm God. I think Old Scratch knows that very well. I think it's more that we feel God's presence, heart to heart, spirit to spirit, in a close, secure relationship, and letting him fill that empty and battered heart with his love and strength. And so what that means maybe is before you even pray or say or read scriptures in the morning, before you jump out of bed on your to-do list, just pause and just feel God's presence. I love it when art can be incorporated in our training. One of my good friends at the university was my dean, who said, I've never seen a picture of Christ smiling. And so I opened my wallet and said, you mean like this one? I'll often share the Mother Teresa video, which never fails to elicit beautiful discussion, particularly in a moment in that video, which you can get for $20, where a trembling child that is traumatized by artillery sounds in Lebanon, a missionary charity soothes that child with soothing strokes, and at some point that child's eyes meets the soother's eyes and feels unconditional love, and you see the body just calm, and the biology changes. The truth shall set us free from what? From a lot of things, including shame and spiritual suffering. So imagine someone is relatively calm and maybe started to process trauma memories, left brains online, some wonderful tools here. Harold and others have developed this religiously integrated cognitive behavioral therapy, RCBT. And this kind of approach challenges, from a spiritual perspective, irrational beliefs that get imprinted, like I'm no good, I'm irredeemable, not lovable. God won't forgive me for what I did. And a faith leader might say, can you tell me where that's written? Or if God loved me to ensure there'd be no suffering, well, does that mean that Job and Jesus and Paul were not loved? So RCBT, very effective for emotional distress. There are versions for various religions, and they're free from the website, which is in your handout, along with myths that block healing and spiritual lies that we can be prepared to help people counter. Forgiveness from a spiritual perspective. What I found in our addiction recovery program is people who are earnestly trying to change. They've gotten past their addictions, they're cleaning up their life, and they'll say things like, I know God forgives, but I can't forgive myself, even though I can forgive others. And so the AA idea, God forgives, but the nervous system takes longer. In my experience, sometimes the feeling of forgiveness comes quickly. Probably more often it comes incrementally over time. But for the earnest, peace comes. And so, what helps? Anything that helps to undo shame or deal with our imperfect actions through self-compassion and mindfulness. But the one I think is maybe the biggest one underlying inability to forgive. Maybe I know about God's love intellectually, but I can't experience it, or I haven't experienced it at the heart level. So, like the prodigal's father who was waiting expectantly and then succored, literally ran to and embraced and celebrate that son's return. That's the way this works. So for homework, you might just give people spiritual assurances of God's love and forgiveness, and then ask them to just spend some time being still and feeling his presence. I like to use stories of forgiveness, people who forgave the seemingly unforgivable. Wish I had time to talk about this one, but this was not a little peasant girl. This was a well-to-do girl who was accidentally napalmed and was on the verge of suicide because of her pain and her being shunned because of her scarring. And she stumbled upon a Bible in a library in Vietnam, which said, "Forgive your enemies, bless them that curse you." And her prayer was, "Help me to know what I don't know how to do now." Uh, Moral clarity and support and the themes are often taught in religion. If repent sounds too serious, you might encourage someone to just hear instead, "I love you, be happy. I love you, be happy." So quickly, a few thoughts about our addiction recovery program my wife and I got to do. We reasoned that people would perhaps be more likely to come if they felt that they could trust and feel safe with us. And so we visited congregations in the region and asked for only 5 minutes. And we said, basically, in that 5 minutes, an addiction is any harmful habit or behavior that ruins happiness in ourselves. And it's not just the obvious stuff. It can be any of these things. Sometimes they start with curiosity, peer pressure, or prescription drugs. Perhaps it's we used it as a way to temporarily relieve stress or pain that we didn't know how to cope with. Often that pain is from childhood, but now we want to heal the pain. So we would share that anyone can recover. Addictions don't define you. The other side of addictions is the happiness and peace you're created for, and the Lord can heal more effectively and completely than psychology or medicine alone can. This is essentially a master class in building a relationship with the Lord. It is based on the AA 12-step program with special permission to adapt the steps to Christ and the atonement. Free, anonymous, and confidential. And it's a come as you are program with a reminder there's no place so dark that the healing love of God cannot reach. So invited, I found that people almost always came with a willingness to let the Lord in and to lead, as opposed to say, "I'm here because my wife pushed me here." It felt like sitting around the table with loved ones around a meal. And I'd often share that I think when Christ suffered in the garden and on the cross, that he had these addiction recovery meetings in mind. We shared paintings on a regular basis to remind us that no matter how deep we feel we're in a hole, that loving hand is within reach. Let me just quickly highlight a couple of things in the resource handout that Harold emailed to everybody. On page 1 is the information on the Center for Spirituality, Theology, and Health, where you can find free copies of the RCBT manual and his handbook for religion and health. There's also information there on finding trauma therapists. There are the books that the 4 that I pulled most of this from that kind of gives the how-tos. On page 2, you'll see information on the faith-based addiction recovery program. Anyone can get a free manual downloaded or for a nominal fee, a paper copy. On page 4 to 8, I strongly feel that when we're struggling and in a hole, we need constant spiritual nourishment, constant reminders. And so there's reflections on comfort and inner peace on those pages. Page 10 is suggestions for trauma survivors for religious and spiritual practice for those who are inclined that way. Page 11 and 12 are the PTSD and dissociative symptoms, and page 13 are the common spiritual lies that need to be rebutted. So, in conclusion, I had the honor of interviewing Louis Zamperini right before he died, and he came back from horrendous daily torture and 47 days on a life raft. He really was broken. What turned his whole life around, his wife prayed him to a Billy Graham revival where he actually came back after bolting twice and said, okay, I'm willing to give myself to you. And that changed his whole life around. In conclusion, people suffer needlessly for decades when there are many effective strategies to heal. People of faith, properly prepared, can explain and normalize the hurt and guide people to the healing strategies, trauma specialists, ultimately the ultimate master healer. So there's my contact information. I'm glad to connect if you want to throw ideas around. We have a few minutes for questions, and then I can stay afterwards for as long as you'd like to. But turn it back over to you, Harold.
Glenn, thank you. Thank you for just a wonderful, inspirational talk. And many have indicated in the chat, that they were moved by this presentation. So let's just open it up for questions. If you have a question, just unmute yourself and ask Glenn.
Hey, Glenn, this is Dale Fletcher.
Hi, Dale.
I'm looking at your comprehensive healing plan slide. And just a comment, it doesn't include the spiritual dimension that you very eloquently talked about how essential it is. So I would just challenge you to figure out how you can add that in the language that you might use to include the spiritual dimension in your quote unquote comprehensive healing plan.
Yeah, I think that's wise, Dale. That was developed basically for a secular audience, and that's why we have these lovely experiences like this seminar to say, now how do we weave in the spiritual?
Excellent.
So thank you for your presentation.
You bet.
Camelia, you're up.
Great. Thank you so much for such an amazing presentation. You made very complex concepts seem so easy to understand. My question is something that you talked about throughout, but I think I'm just trying to really identify your view on senseless pain. I know you talked about pain in so many ways and forgiveness, and my biggest difficulty is really contextualizing or understanding senseless pain, the things like abuse of children or elderly, or a lot of pain can make sense, and there is a coherence about it and a post-traumatic growth and a learning, but there is some senseless pain that sometimes I don't know how to understand. I'm just wondering your own personal view.
Good old Nietzsche, the atheist philosopher, said, if it doesn't kill you, it can make you stronger. It will make you strong. I don't buy that at all. I think I've seen so many people that are broken by pain, especially intentional human inflicted pain. So I don't know how you make that sensible other than by saying that, there people act out their own pain that they haven't resolved, or sometimes I think people get sucked into evil. I think the only thing I know how to make sense of that is suffer it with God by your side, and maybe only in retrospect will you see purpose in that suffering. Many people that are healers because of the things they suffered. Um, I think once healing occurs, we're then more effective to heal others. I don't know if that touches on what you're getting at, but
Yeah, no, it touches very much. I'm also wondering, like, the concept of God. Does God allow senseless pain? Is senseless pain from God? Is senseless pain from the devil? Like, sometimes I just don't know.
yeah, this is just my way to conceptualize it. I think we're living in a world where we're granted free agency. And when there's free agency, then people are going to misuse that agency. And that's when such senseless things start to happen. So, um, an imperfect world where there is free agent, you're going to see some bad stuff. And all we can do is try to um, grow beyond that and get strong ourselves so that we don't re-traumatize people intergenerationally or so really the battle is how do we get strong and good in a way
Thank
that's
you so
kind of
much.
simple.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks for the question.
Yes, if I may add something, thank you so much for this comprehensive presentation. And my name is Naji. I'm Lebanese American, had privilege of presenting here before. If I may add about the spirituality and the religious aspect as a factor of healing. In North America, we emphasize a lot individuality and individual spirituality. So what I would recommend is collective spirituality and involvement in communal and cultural activities that brings a lot of healing, not only for mental health, but for so many other social disorders like disconnectivity, isolation, and so forth. And we move from individual spirituality, me, myself, and I try to find, the niche feeling into being part of, for example, singing in congregation, participating in dances, in food, in rituals, and then in many cultures, religion and spirituality are together, inseparable, like Paul Tillich said in his theology of culture. What is spiritual is psychological. What is religious is cultural. So to bring that into the global picture as well.
Couldn't agree more with you. And yeah, I mean, sometimes you just show up at a group setting and all of a sudden you feel better and you're not really sure why, but it's all the things you mentioned. Social support, music, hearing great thoughts expressed by other people. You go, oh, that's just what I needed.
Right. This is the organic connection with the community is very healing, and we need to reinvent this community.
Yeah.
And in religious activities are really wonderful nurture for the soul and the mind and the heart.
Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome.
Great comment.
Dorothy, you're up next.
Oh, I am?
Yes.
I didn't raise my hand, but I guess I'm thinking about the importance of spirituality and an old dissertation I did years and years ago, and I've been waiting for someone to talk about it. Not the dissertation, but the integration. And the result of my talking to people about their dissociative identity disorder and their healing was basically we healed through the arts. The arts were the bridge to the divine. And our healing was a spiritual process. And each of these participants were from different backgrounds. They varied in their backgrounds. So I think I wish in some way that we could kind of concoct another modern research exploration into this, into these connections, and maybe use existential theory as a way of connection.
Well, thanks for that thought, and congratulations for surviving your doctoral dissertation.
Oh, that was 40 years ago.
Hope it didn't traumatize you too bad.
Okay. Any more questions?
Could I perhaps
Emma.
raise a question as well?
Yes.
Hi. Hi, I'm calling from the Netherlands. So one of the things I work a lot with women, and one of the things that's a struggle for me is that sometimes their trauma is based on sort of imagined trauma from groups of people rather than really specific trauma. Like all men are really horrible and they are all out against me or something. So I'm just curious. I'm curious how you help people to work through that. If you've experienced that at all, that there's this like perceived trauma from all these various things that these women are sort of processing. And I'm trying to get them to focus on just a few things that have really happened to them. But they're so influenced by all these different cultural narratives we have right now. So I'm like, okay, well, how can we process that for you? So yeah, I'm just curious if you have any experience with that.
You're a clinician?
I'm actually just a lay person who works with the church, and I coach women and
right.
do workshops.
I mean, I think the principle is go to your earliest memory of that kind of thing happening. And sometimes when that gets resolved, the overgeneralizing starts to resolve a bit. You know, you can attack it cognitively, like, and you see this in overgeneralization distortion, but I think it's often deeper. You know, so once it's processed at the emotional level, the earliest memory, I think we got a better chance of resolving the generalizing stuff.
Okay, great, thanks.
That's what a good trauma therapist will do. So, but I like your thought, and you know, that may not resolve from friend to friend talking, but it may resolve in a clinical setting. Yeah.
Andrea, I think you're up next.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I do have a question for you regarding moral injury. My father is 86 years old, and he has suffered from moral injury from the Cuban Missile Crisis in the Bay of Pigs back in the 60s. And he has not had a good night's sleep since then. And he's done quite a few therapies and whatnot, and he's has very short temper, as you can well imagine. He's not in the best of health, and I'm trying to understand how best as a daughter to support him through that experience from a family member perspective, and how to help him through. He has services through the VA, however, he's kind of done with talk therapy. I wish I had known about your previous slide saying, that the body first before the brain. So just would like your understanding of how to best serve and love him through the trauma.
Yeah. Harold, please jump in. You probably have some great insights on this. I would want to know what kind of therapy is gotten, because the therapy 20, 30 years ago, very different than what's available today.
Yeah.
Um,
He has had some recent, but he's like, it's just, it has to be more than talk. Like, they just sit there and look at me and talk to me and
yeah, right.
questions, which is what therapy is. But
Is he open to the spiritual aspects of healing?
so I am a minister, and I bring it to him in every way I can with my life and my love to him. So he has severe neuropathy and some other issues, health issues, that precludes him from actually leaving the house and going to church. And I've recommended like online, but the same. Since he's not been integrated into a church for many years, he doesn't have that network or a pastor or anyone locally that could minister to him in that capacity.
Just one quick thought, and then Harold, I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts. Sometimes there's an image that gets stuck. I feel guilt and shame because of this trauma event. And until it gets fully processed, the guilt is part of that memory. So sometimes you go back to whatever that. I'm thinking about a pilot in Vietnam, 62 incredible childhood trauma. I've never heard anybody had worse. He got over all of that, forgave his mother, but what he was stuck on was bombing a schoolhouse, which he was ordered to bomb. He was told it was an ammunition depot of the enemy. And he saw the kids running out after he tried to resist, but he bombed it. Once that memory was reworked and changed, and accelerated resolution therapy is so beautiful here, because instead of now bombing that schoolhouse, he just saw that he squeezed the trigger, but the bomb didn't hit. So now he obeyed the order. I didn't get in trouble, but the kids are still alive. Tears comes to his eyes, and he just said, I felt like I never could get over that memory. It's bothered him 62 years. So sometimes the memory is not fully processed, and what's in there is lots of things, including guilt. And Harold, that's more than I wanted to say, but you have some manuals on some classes on moral injury, don't you?
I bought the book. I just haven't had a chance to attend it.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got a 8-hour workshop coming up on October the 11th where we talk about that. But Glenn, I tell you, I think your response was excellent. I think you do have to get back to that memory, like you said, and work through it. And we give some religious, spiritual, and secular ways that treatments for moral injury. And in any case, we got a book out on it too for chaplains and service members. Moral injury, a handbook for military leaders and chaplains. So, but I think Glenn, you did a great job in responding.
I did reach out to some Army chaplains. I actually worked for the Office of the Surgeon General of the Army for 4 years, and I'd love to connect with you. But I was able to get some resources from them because he was Army as well, and I thought he would be more receptive to that. But thank you for your feedback, and I will see if I can attend the workshop. I would really love to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for you trying to help him.
Okay, I think we're going to have to close. We went a little bit longer today just because, Glenn is such a great speaker. He's got so much wisdom. And your questions that people asked were also just wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and conclude. And thank you all for participating. And